27,000 feet above Kassel, Germany, October 30th, 1943. The tail gunner's breath crystallizes inside his oxygen mask. 40 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Through the plexiglass bubble, he watches them form up. German fighters. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, mostly with a few Focke-Wulf 190s mixed in. Wolves circling wounded prey. He counts them. 8, 10, 15. His fingers rest on the twin 50 caliber machine gun triggers. The guns are cold. Everything is cold at this altitude. His electric gloves barely keep the numbness at bay. Through the Nissen ring sight, he can see the lead Messerschmitt clearly, 900 yards behind the bomber formation. The pilot is good, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to attack. Standard doctrine says wait. Wait until they close to 600 yards. Wait until optimal firing range. Wait until the book says you have the best chance of hitting. But Staff Sergeant Thomas Kazan isn't following the book anymore. The book killed his best friend 3 weeks ago. His right hand tightens on the trigger. The enemy fighters are still at 900 yards, 3 times the regulation range, 3 times farther than he's supposed to engage. Somewhere in the bomber, his crew thinks he's lost his mind. They've been saying it on the intercom for weeks. Kazan's cracking up, combat fatigue, too many missions. They don't know what he's figured out. They don't know he's about to save 750 American lives by breaking every rule in the manual. The lead Messerschmitt banks left. Attack run beginning. Tommy's finger moves to the trigger. Not yet. Wait for it. Wait. 900 yards. Now. This is the story of how a high school dropout from Springfield, Massachusetts rewrote the manual on aerial combat. How one man's refusal to follow orders changed the course of the air war over Europe. How courage sometimes means doing exactly what you're told not to do. The numbers tell part of the story. In October 1943, during a single week that would become known as Black Week, the United States 8th Air Force lost 148 heavy bombers. Gone. Shot down. Destroyed. That's not just machines. That's nearly 1,500 men killed, wounded, or captured in 7 days. The loss rate hit 13% per mission. Do the mathematics. At that rate, every bomber crew had roughly 7 missions before the odds caught up with them. The requirement for going home was 25 missions. The numbers said it was impossible. The entire 8th Air Force would be destroyed before spring arrived. The problem wasn't the bombers themselves. The B-17 Flying Fortress bristled with 1350 caliber machine guns. Boeing engineers had built a Flying Porcupine, a 10-man weapon designed to shoot its way to the target and back. The Fortress had armor. It had redundant systems. It had the best technology American industry could produce. The problem was that the Porcupine's quills weren't hitting anything. 8th Air Force intelligence analysts studied gun camera footage for months. They pored over after action reports. They interviewed surviving crews. They ran the numbers on again and again, hoping the mathematics would somehow change. The numbers didn't change. For every 100 rounds fired by American bomber gunners, fewer than 2 actually struck an attacking fighter. Less than 2% accuracy. The other 98 rounds disappeared into empty air, while German pilots poured 20mm cannon fire into aluminum fuselages. The German pilots had learned to exploit every gap in the American defensive fire. They came in high at 12 o'clock where the B-17's nose guns had limited range. They came in low at 6 o'clock, screaming up from below where the ball turret gunner couldn't traverse fast enough. Most devastatingly, they perfected the head-on attack, closing at combined speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour, firing their cannons in 30mm rockets, then breaking away before the bomber guns could track them. The Army Air Forces tried everything. They experimented with different formations, tight boxes that concentrated firepower but made the bombers easier to hit with anti-aircraft fire, loose formations that gave each plane room to maneuver but left gaps the German fighters exploited like water finding cracks. They modified the B-17s, added chin turrets to cover the 12 o'clock high position, improved the tail guns, enhanced the armor. They trained gunners endlessly on deflection shooting, the art of leading a moving target, aiming not at where the enemy is, but where he will be when your bullets arrive. But deflection shooting was incredibly difficult. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 attacking at 300 miles per hour moves 440 feet per second. A 50 caliber bullet travels at 2,900 feet per second. At 600 yards, 1,800 feet, the bullet takes 6/10 of a second to reach the target. In that time, the fighter moves 264 feet. The gunner must aim 26 aircraft lengths ahead of the target, in combat, at 40 degrees below zero, while his bomber bounces in turbulence, while he fights hypoxia from a damaged oxygen line, while tracers and cannon shells rip through aluminum skin around him, while his friends die. The experts all agreed bomber gunners needed to fire at the regulation range of 400 to 600 yards. Use standard deflection principles. Follow the training, trust the doctrine. The problem was that the doctrine was getting everyone killed. During the final 6 months of 1943, the 8th Air Force lost over 600 bombers to German fighters. 6,000 men who followed the rules right into their graves. Only 25% of bomber crews were completing their 25 mission tours. The rest were dead, crippled, or rotting in German prisoner of war camps. The statistics scream that something fundamental was wrong, but institutions don't change easily. The Army Air Forces had invested millions of dollars training 214,000 aerial gunners in the correct technique. Gunnery instructors who had never fired a shot in combat wrote the manuals and ran the schools. They knew the mathematics. They knew the ballistics. They knew the theory. What they didn't know was that their theory was fiction. It would take a skinny kid from Massachusetts with a high school dropout's contempt for authority to figure out what all the experts had missed. Thomas Kazan was nobody's idea of a hero. Born July 31st, 1919, to Lebanese immigrant parents in Springfield, Massachusetts. His father, Joseph, worked the looms at the American Bosch textile mill on Page Boulevard. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, $42 a month when work was steady. His mother, Layla, took in laundry and did alterations to make ends meet. The smell of lye soap and heated irons filled their third-floor walk-up apartment on Dwight Street. Tommy grew up during the Great Depression in a neighborhood where nobody had much, but everyone knew how to make do. He attended Springfield Technical High School, showed promise in mathematics and mechanical drawing. But he wasn't good with books. He wasn't good with authority. What he was good at was seeing patterns that other people missed, trusting his own observations over what he was told. November 1935 changed everything. Joseph Kazan's left arm caught in the loom machinery during the night shift. The metal teeth of the loom pulled him in before anyone could hit the emergency stop. He bled out in the factory infirmary while a doctor who'd been drinking tried to tie off arteries that were already empty. The company paid Layla $200, one-time payment, final settlement. Sign here, please. Tommy was 16. He dropped out of Springfield Technical High School the next week. There was no discussion, no debate. His sister Rose was 12 and dreaming of college someday. His mother was 41 and looked 60. Tommy took a job as a chauffeur for a lawyer downtown. $12 a week. He sent 10 home. The lesson Tommy learned wasn't about looms or factories or negligent doctors. The lesson was about trust. The company said the machine was safe. The book said follow procedure. His father followed the book. His father died. The company paid $200 and hired someone new. Tommy learned not to trust what he was told. Not books, not bosses, not experts who'd never gotten their hands dirty. For 7 years, Tommy drove the lawyer's Packard and saved what little he could. He dated a girl from the neighborhood for a while, but it didn't take. He went to the pictures on Saturday nights when he had spare change. He helped his mother with the rent. He watched his sister graduate high school and go to work at the munitions plant because college was a dream that died with their father. When December 7, 1941 arrived, Tommy was 22 years old, single, underemployed, and going nowhere. The attack on Pearl Harbor meant different things to different people. To some, it meant patriotic duty. To others, revenge. To Tommy Kazan, it meant a paycheck. He walked into the Army recruiting station on August 25, 1942. The recruiter was a sergeant who'd seen 1,000 young men walk through that door. He looked at this 138-pound kid with the olive skin and dark eyes and probably thought cannon fodder. Tommy saw $50 a month, $40 to send home to his mother and sister, $10 to keep. That was the calculation, not patriotism, not ideology, just economics. The recruiter asked the standard questions. The answers were unremarkable. Tommy signed the papers, took the oath, became property of the United States Army. Neither of them predicted that this unremarkable young man would become the highest-scoring aerial gunner in American history. The training pipeline was standard. Basic training at Camp Croft in Greensboro, North Carolina. Up at 5, drill until 7. Breakfast, more drill. Rifle practice, bayonet training, gas mask drills. The Army taking soft civilians and filing off the edges until they fit into slots. Tommy was mediocre at all of it, not strong enough to excel at the physical training, not enthusiastic enough to impress the drill instructors. He kept his head down and did what he was told and tried not to think about the fact that his mother's letters said Rose had started dating a factory foreman twice her age. After basic came gunnery school at Fort Myers, Florida. This was where the Army decided what kind of gunner you'd be. Waist gunner, ball turret, tail, top turret, radio room. The instructors taught them how to strip it and reassemble at the .50 caliber Browning machine gun blindfolded, how to clear jams at altitude while wearing heavy gloves, how to calculate deflection angles and lead distances. They showed films of successful attacks and unsuccessful attacks. They ran drills in mock turrets that spun and tilted while instructors shouted and rang bells and tried to simulate combat stress. Staff Sergeant Howard Kellerman ran the deflection training. He was 34 from Iowa and had never been in combat. But he'd read all the manuals and attended all the instructor courses, and he knew the mathematics cold. Engage enemy fighters at 400 to 600 yards, optimal firing range, best balance of hit probability and ammunition conservation. Fire in controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, conserve ammunition and prevent barrel overheating. Calculate deflection based on target speed and angle. Lead the target, aim where he will be, not where he is. Tommy sat through the lectures and absorbed the information. But something bothered him, something about the training films. He watched them over and over during free time, running the footage backward and forward. The American gunners opened fire at 600 yards exactly as trained. Their tracers arced out in beautiful geometric curves and missed. Again and again, the tracers passed through empty air while the German fighters pressed their attacks. One evening after chow, Tommy approached Sergeant Kellerman with a question. What if we shot earlier, before they reached 600 yards? Kellerman looked at him like he'd suggested flying the bombers upside down. You'll waste ammunition and die tired, Private. The mathematics are clear. Hit probability drops dramatically beyond 600 yards. You'll burn through your ammunition load without effect. But what if the point isn't to hit them? What if the point is to make them break off before they get into their own firing range? Kellerman's face hardened. Private, are you questioning 8 years of research and development? Are you suggesting you know better than the experts who designed this system? No, Sergeant. Just asking. Don't ask. Learn. Follow the doctrine. It's written that way for a reason. Tommy said yes, Sergeant, and walked away. But the question stayed with him. By June 1943, Staff Sergeant Thomas Kazan found himself assigned to the 527th Bombardment Squadron, 379th Bombardment Group stationed at Royal Air Force Kimbolton in Cambridge, England. The base was a collection of Nissen huts and mud surrounding a runway carved from farmland. Cold, wet, the kind of damp that got into your bones and stayed there. He was assigned as tail gunner on B-17F, number 42, 29896, nicknamed Lucky Strike after someone's favorite cigarette brand. The crew consisted of 10 men who would live or die together. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, pilot, 25 years old. West Point graduate, stern and by the book. He'd grown up believing in systems and hierarchies and the chain of command. Danny Morrison, waist gunner, 24. Irish-American from Tommy's own neighborhood in Springfield. They'd known each other since childhood. Danny had enlisted the same day Tommy did. They'd promised each other's mothers they'd watch each other's backs. Frank Walsh, waist gunner, 28, from the Bronx, cynical sense of humor that masked deeper worries. He'd seen enough of the world to know how easily it could kill you. Plus the navigator, bombardier, radio operator, ball turret gunner, and top turret gunner. Names and faces that would become more important than family. The tail gunner position was both the most important and most isolated on the bomber. You sat alone in a plexiglass bubble, jutting from the aircraft's rear facing backward, watching the world recede. When German fighters attacked from behind their preferred angle, You were the last line of defense. You were also the most likely to die. The tail position had the highest casualty rate of any position on the B-17, except possibly the ball turret gunner, who sat in a glass sphere hanging from the bomber's belly with his knees pulled up to his chest and his guns pointing down. If the landing gear failed, the ball turret gunner was crushed. If the bomber ditched it in water, the ball turret gunner drowned before he could get out. But the tail gunner died more often because German fighters loved the 6 o'clock position, attacking from directly behind, where one fighter could engage without being hit by crossfire from other bombers in the formation. Tommy climbed into the tail position for the first time during a practice flight and understood immediately why the casualty rate was so high. The space was cramped, claustrophobic. The plexiglass bubble offered visibility in every direction, which meant you could see death coming from any angle. The twin 50 caliber guns were your only friends. Everything else was cold metal and thin armor, and the knowledge that German cannon shells went through aluminum like paper. Lucky Strike's first combat mission came on June 22, 1943. Target Bremen, Germany. The briefing room at 0400 was full of nervous energy and cigarette smoke. 200 B-17s would attack the port city. Intelligence expected heavy anti-aircraft fire and strong fighter opposition. No escort past the Belgian coast. The fighter boys in their P-47 Thunderbolts didn't have the range to go all the way into Germany. Past a certain point, the bombers were on their own. Tommy ate breakfast without tasting it. Powdered eggs, toast, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a helmet. The chaplain said a prayer. Tommy didn't bow his head. At 0730, Lucky Strike took its position in the formation. Tommy climbed into the tail section, settled into the tiny seat, checked his oxygen, tested his guns. Smooth action. The bomber lifted off, circled the field, joined the stream of aircraft heading east. The formation climbed to 27,000 feet. The temperature dropped to 40 below zero. Tommy's breath froze inside his oxygen mask. His fingers went numb, despite the electric gloves plugged into the aircraft's electrical system. England fell away, then the Channel, then France, then Germany. At 1100 hours they appeared, 15 Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving from 12 o'clock high, black crosses on their wings. The whole formation seemed to contract as every gunner swiveled toward the threat. Tommy tracked them through his Nissen sight. 800 yards, 700, 600. Now. He opened fire. The twin 50s hammered, brass casings ejected and clattered on the deck. Tracers streamed out in glowing red arcs. Miss, the lead Bf-109 jinked left, came in from a different angle. His 20mm cannons flashed. Shells punched through Lucky Strike's right wing. The ball turret gunner screamed on the intercom, hit, wounded, blood in the turret. Tommy kept firing, more tracers, more misses. The German fighter was too fast, too maneuverable. By the time Tommy's bullets reached where the fighter had been, it was somewhere else. The Messerschmitt broke off unscathed, looking for another target. Around the formation, bombers started going down. Tommy watched through his bubble as a B-17 at 2 o'clock took a direct hit to the bomb bay. The explosion was instantaneous. The aircraft simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. The next moment, there was a fireball and pieces of metal tumbling toward Earth. Another bomber at 9 o'clock lost its entire tail section to rocket fire. It tumbled. No parachutes emerged. 8 bombers from the 379th Bomb Group didn't make it home that day. 80 men. Some bailed out and became prisoners. Most died. Lucky Strike landed at Kimbolton at 1500 hours. Tommy climbed out of the tail position on shaking legs. The ball turret gunner was already at the base hospital. He'd survive, but he'd never fly again. Shrapnel in both lungs. The post-mission debriefing was routine. Intelligence officers asked questions. Gunners reported what they'd seen. Tommy's numbers went into the logbook. Ammunition expended 347 rounds. Within regulation, enemy aircraft destroyed 0. Lieutenant Brennan put a hand on Tommy's shoulder as they walked back to the Nissen hut. "You did good up there, Kazan. Kept them off our tail." Tommy nodded but didn't respond, because he knew he hadn't done good. He'd done what he was trained to do, and it hadn't worked. The enemy had pressed their attack, had fired their weapons, had hit the bomber, had wounded a crew member. The doctrine had failed, but the doctrine was all they had. Over the next 3 months, Tommy flew 11 more missions. Bremen again. Kiel, Hamburg, Hanover, Oschersleben, Stuttgart. Each time the pattern repeated. Wait for 600 yards, fire control bursts. Watch tracers miss. Watch bombers explode. Watch parachutes blossom when the crews were lucky. Watch bodies fall when they weren't. Tommy started keeping a notebook. He recorded every engagement, distance, angle, result. He did mathematics on scraps of paper in the Nissen hut while other gunners played cards or wrote letters home. The numbers told a story the experts didn't want to hear. By the time American gunners engaged at 600 yards, German fighters were already in their own optimal firing range. The Messerschmitts 20mm cannons were effective out to 600 yards. Some of the newer fighters had 30mm weapons effective beyond 800 yards, which meant the doctrine gave the initiative to the attacker every single time. The German pilot would stabilize his aircraft at 700 yards, line up his shot, and fire. The American gunner would wait until 600 yards exactly as trained and return fire. By then, German shells were already hitting the bomber. Tommy ran the numbers again and again. If he opened fire at 900 yards, the German fighters would fly through his tracers before they expected return fire. Before they were in their own optimal range. Before they'd stabilize for their attack run. Would his hit probability drop? Absolutely. At 900 yards, the odds of actually hitting the target were minimal. But that wasn't the point. The point was disruption. Make them jink. Make them break formation. Make them abort their carefully planned attack runs. Force them to go defensive before they could go offensive. Make them afraid. Tommy started trying to explain this to other gunners during the long evenings between missions. Most of them dismissed it. The book says 600 yards Kazan. Who are you to question it? Danny Morrison listened, though. Danny always listened to Tommy. They'd been friends since they were kids running around the streets of Springfield. Danny was the optimist, the believer, the one who thought things would work out if you just followed the rules and did your best. "You really think the experts are wrong?" Danny asked one night as they lay in their bunks. "I think they've never been shot at," Tommy said. "I think they're solving a mathematics problem on paper, and we're the ones bleeding when the math doesn't work." Danny was quiet for a long time. Then, "But if everyone just does their own thing, there's no discipline, no coordination. I'm not saying everyone should do their own thing. I'm saying maybe we should rethink 600 yards." Danny rolled over. "Get some sleep, Tommy. We got another mission tomorrow." But Tommy couldn't sleep. The numbers kept running through his head. 600 yards, 900 yards, initiative, disruption. The difference between coming home and not coming home. The answer was there. He could see it. But seeing it and proving it were different things. And the Army didn't care about theories from staff sergeants who dropped out of high school. October 1943 arrived with cold rain and the knowledge that the air war was being lost. Black Week started on October 8, 1943. The name came later after the survivors counted the dead, and the Air Force intelligence officers added up the losses and realized what had just happened. At the time, the crews just called it hell. Thursday, October 14th was the worst day. The target was Schweinfurt, deep in southern Germany. Ball-bearing factories, critical to the German war machine. The planners said destroying them would cripple production of fighters, tanks, and submarines. The planners were right about the importance. They were wrong about the cost. 291 B-17s took off that morning. 60 never came home. Shot down, destroyed, gone. That's 770 men killed or captured in a single day. The surviving bombers came back shot full of holes trailing smoke with dead men still strapped in their positions because there was no time to move them. The Luftwaffe had been waiting. They knew the route, they knew the target. They hit the formation in waves. Messerschmitts from 12 o'clock high. Focke-Wulfs from 6 o'clock low. Head-on attacks with 30mm rockets that could tear a wing off with a single hit. Tommy fired at 600 yards exactly as trained. His tracers missed exactly as they always did. The German shells didn't miss. They punched through Lucky Strike's fuselage, shredded the radio room, killed the radio operator instantly. The navigator took shrapnel in both legs. The number 3 engine caught fire and had to be shut down. Around him, the sky filled with burning bombers. Bomber at 2 o'clock wing, sheared off by a rocket. The aircraft rolled, inverted, and spiraled into the cloud deck. Tommy counted 3 parachutes. The crew was 10 men. Bomber at 9 o'clock, direct hit to the fuel tanks. The explosion was so bright, Tommy had to look away. No parachutes, no survivors. Just burning debris falling toward Germany. Bomber below, belly torn open by cannon fire. Tommy could see into the aircraft, could see men moving inside. Then it fell away tumbling and he lost sight of it. 77 bombers shot down that day. But Black Week wasn't just about October 14th. It was about the cumulative losses from October 8th through October 14th. 148 heavy bombers destroyed in 7 days. Nearly 1,500 men who would never see home again. The mathematics were brutal and simple. At that loss rate, the entire 8th Air Force would cease to exist before Christmas. But the worst moment for Tommy Kazan didn't come on October 14th. It came 4 days earlier, October 10th, 1943, Target Munster. The mission was supposed to be routine if any combat mission could be called routine. The weather was clear, the formation was tight. Intelligence said expect moderate opposition. Intelligence was wrong. The German fighters hit them over the border, not in waves, not in coordinated attacks, in a sustained assault that lasted 40 minutes. They came from every direction. High, low-level diving climbing. Relentless. Lucky Strike took a head-on attack at 11:15 hours. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 came straight at them from 12 o'clock high. Closing speed over 600 miles per hour. The combined velocity of 2 aircraft trying to kill each other. The Chin turret gunner opened fire at 600 yards, exactly as trained. His tracers reached out and missed. The Messerschmitt didn't miss. 20-millimeter cannons flashed. Shells punched through the nose section, ripped through the bombardier's station, tore into the fuselage. Metal fragments sprayed through the aircraft at supersonic speeds, ricocheting off bulkheads, finding flesh. In the waist section, Danny Morrison was standing at his gun, scanning for targets, when 3 pieces of shrapnel hit him. Neck, chest, abdomen, all within a 1-second span. He screamed, high and terrible. The sound cut through the intercom and froze everyone who heard it. Then the scream turned into a wet, gurgling sound. Then nothing. Tommy heard it all from the tail position. He tried to move, tried to climb out of the cramped seat and get to his friend. But the tail gunner's position was a prison. You couldn't leave during combat. The space was too small. The aircraft was too violent in its movements, and German fighters were still attacking. Frank Walsh's voice came over the intercom, shaking, almost breaking. Danny's hit. Danny's down. Oh God, there's so much blood. Tommy's hands stayed on his guns because that was all he could do. Keep firing. Keep the fighters off. Keep Lucky Strike alive even though Danny was dying 30 feet away and there was nothing anyone could do about it. How bad, Lieutenant Brennan's voice. Tight. Controlled. Real bad, Lieutenant. Real bad. I don't think he's breathing. The mission continued because that's what missions did. They continued until the bombs were dropped and the aircraft turned for home. Individual tragedy was irrelevant to the larger objective. The formation kept flying. The bombardier released his payload. The navigator plotted the return course. Lucky Strike made it back to Kim Bolton at 1400 hours. Tommy climbed out of the tail position before the propeller stopped spinning, ran to the waist section, pushed past the ground crew. Danny Morrison lay on the deck, 24 years old, from Springfield, Massachusetts. Tommy's best friend since they were kids, stealing apples from the corner store. The boy who'd promised Mrs. Morrison he'd watch Tommy's back and make sure they both came home. His blood had frozen in the 40 below zero temperature, crystallized on the aluminum floor like red ice. His eyes were still open, staring at nothing. Frank Walsh sat against the fuselage wall covered in Danny's blood, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. He kept asking for you, Frank said quietly. Kept saying your name. I told him you were keeping the fighters off. I told him you were protecting us. Then he just stopped talking. Tommy knelt beside Danny's body. Didn't cry, couldn't cry. The grief was too big for tears. It was a physical thing, a weight in his chest that made breathing hurt. A corpsman arrived with a stretcher. Respectful, professional. This wasn't his first body. They covered Danny with a blanket and carried him away. That night, Tommy sat in the empty Nissen hut and went through Danny's footlocker. It was his duty as Danny's friend. Someone had to inventory the personal effects before they were sent home to Mrs. Morrison. Letters, photographs, a rosary, a pack of playing cards, a journal Danny had kept but never let anyone read, and letters to home, dozens of them, all saying the same thing in different ways. Don't worry, Ma, we're being careful. Tommy and I watch each other's backs. We'll be fine. Tommy held the last letter Danny had written and couldn't breathe, because Danny had been watching Tommy's back, had been doing everything right, had been following the doctrine exactly as trained, and the doctrine had gotten him killed. The book said, engage at 600 yards. Danny had engaged at 600 yards. The German pilot had already been firing at 700 yards. German shells had hit Lucky Strike before Danny had even pulled his trigger. The book was wrong. The book had killed Danny Morrison. Tommy made a decision that night. He didn't announce it, didn't discuss it with anyone, didn't ask permission. He just decided. 600 yards had killed his best friend. 900 yards might save the next man. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't. But he knew for absolute certain that following the book was a death sentence. The next combat mission was scheduled for October 30th, 1943. Target Castle, Germany. Henschel Aircraft Factories. 300 miles into enemy territory. No fighter escort. Heavy opposition expected. Tommy spent the 20 days between missions preparing. He cleaned his twin 50 caliber guns obsessively, ran patches through the barrels until they gleamed like mirrors, loaded extra ammunition, 2,400 rounds instead of the standard 1,500, smuggled the extra belts aboard Lucky Strike hidden in his flight gear. Frank Walsh noticed, "You planning on fighting the whole Luftwaffe by yourself, Kazan?" Something like that. The briefing came at 0400 on October 30th. 200 B-17s. Deep penetration. Standard doctrine on ammunition conservation. Lieutenant Brennan looked directly at Tommy when the intelligence officer mentioned ammunition discipline. Tommy said nothing. 0730. Pre-flight. Tommy climbed into the tail position, carrying his extra ammunition, settled into the seat, checked oxygen, tested the guns. Smooth mechanical action. Beautiful. 0815. Lucky Strike took off, joined the formation, climbed to 27,000 feet. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Tommy's breath froze inside his oxygen mask. His fingers went numb. England, Channel, France, Germany, 1,100 hours. They appeared, 8 Messerschmitts initially, then 10, then 15, forming up 1,200 yards behind the bomber stream. Patient, professional, German pilots who knew their business. The intercom crackled. Bandits, 6 o'clock level. All gunners, stand by. Tommy's hands settled on the triggers. The lead Messerschmitt was at 1,000 yards. Standard doctrine said, wait. Wait for 600. Wait for the book. Tommy watched them close. 900 yards. 850. 800. 900 yards. His finger tightened on the trigger. The twin 50 calibers opened fire. The sound was overwhelming even through his leather helmet. The guns hammered. Brass casings ejected and rained onto the deck in a metallic waterfall. Tracers streamed out in glowing red arcs, reaching across 900 yards of empty air. The reaction on the intercom was immediate. Jesus Christ. Kazan's lost his mind. He's firing at 900 yards. Tail gunner, cease fire, Lieutenant Brennan's voice. Sharp, commanding. Tail gunner, you are wasting ammunition. Tommy ignored him, kept his fingers on the triggers. The guns kept firing. Continuous bursts that violated every regulation in the manual. 80 rounds, 90, 100. In the Messerschmitts, the effect was instantaneous. The lead pilot Unteroffizier Hans Becker was a veteran with 4 confirmed bomber kills. He'd flown this attack profile dozens of times. He knew American tail gunners opened fire at 600 yards, sometimes 700 if they panicked. Never at 900, never this early. But today, tracers were streaming toward him at 900 yards, a river of 50 caliber fire earlier than anything in his experience. Becker's training said ignore it. The hit probability at 900 yards was negligible. Maintain your attack vector, close to optimal range. Execute your attack. But Becker's survival instinct overrode his training. He jinked left, hard, breaking formation, his wingman scattered right. The carefully coordinated attack run dissolved before it began. Tommy saw them break and knew it was working. Not because he was hitting them. He wasn't. At 900 yards, his tracers were passing through empty space where the fighters had been. But he was making them react, making them defensive, ruining their attacks before they could stabilize. One Messerschmitt pressed through the fire. The pilot was good, experienced, committed. He held his line despite the tracers committed to his attack run. Tommy tracked him. 800 yards, 750, 700. The fighter was fully committed now. In his attack dive, can't break off without losing all his energy and becoming vulnerable. Tommy's tracers found him at 750 yards. Not a lucky shot. A calculated lid based on the fighter's committed trajectory. Rounds walked up the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Cowling engine compartment. The Daimler-Benz engine exploded. Black smoke erupted. Fire. The aircraft nosed over. The pilot bailed at 600 feet. Parachute blossomed white against the green German countryside. 1. Tommy swung the guns left. Another Messerschmitt diving from 7 o'clock high. 900 yards. Tommy opened fire. The fighter jinked. Aborted. Came around for another pass. Second attempt. 800 yards. Tommy fired. Continuous burst. 120 rounds. The fighter pilot tried to jink again, but he was too close. Too committed. Tracers hit the wing root. The wing folded, sheared completely off. The Messerschmitt tumbled out of control. No parachute. 2. A Focke-Wulf 190 came in from 5 o'clock low. Fast. The pilot had watched the other attacks fail and decided on a different approach. He was coming in from below where Tommy's field of fire was partially blocked by the aircraft's tail structure. Smart. Tommy depressed the guns as far as the mount allowed. Waited. The Focke-Wulf climbed toward Lucky Strike's belly. 600 yards, 550, 500. Tommy fired. The angle was terrible. Most of his rounds went wide, but enough connected. Strikes on the cowling, the propeller. The Focke-Wulf's engine coughed, stuttered, died. The fighter fell away trailing smoke. The pilot tried to restart, failed, bailed out at 3,000 feet. 3. Then a Messerschmitt got through. The pilot came in from 8 o'clock high. Used the sun. Tommy lost him in the glare for 3 critical seconds. When he reacquired the target, the fighter was at 400 yards and already firing. 20mm cannons flashed orange. Shells impacted Lucky Strike's tail section. The first shell severed the oxygen line. Tommy heard the hiss, felt the pressure drop. His vision started to tunnel immediately. At 27,000 feet, hypoxia killed in minutes. His thoughts turned thick. Slow, like moving through honey. Keep firing. The thought was distant, disconnected. Keep firing. His right hand stayed on the trigger. The right gun kept hammering. Second shell, casing jam in the left gun. The weapon seized, dead. Tommy's left hand moved by trained instinct, found the charging handle, pulled. Once. The casing didn't clear. Pulled again. Harder. The casing ejected. The gun was live again. Third shell, fragment punched through his flight jacket, hot metal into his left shoulder. Pain like a brand. Then numbness from the cold. Blood soaked the sheepskin lining of his jacket. Ran down his arm, started to freeze. Tommy's vision was graying. Hypoxia stealing consciousness. His left shoulder wasn't working right. The left gun was firing, but his hand was numb, and he couldn't feel if he was aiming correctly. But the Messerschmitt that had hit him was still there, still attacking, closing for the kill. Tommy's right hand kept the right gun firing. His left gun sprayed tracers in the general direction of the target. Most of the rounds missed, some connected. Hits on the Messerschmitt's engine, wing, fuselage. The aircraft's tail section separated, just broke off. Aerodynamic forces tore it away. The fighter spun, tumbled, disappeared. 4. The remaining German fighters broke off. 4 of their number down. Others damaged. The cost was too high. They'd never encountered defensive fire like this. Never seen a tail gunner this aggressive, this dangerous. They withdrew to find easier targets. Lucky Strike flew on. 2 engines damaged. Hydraulics failing. Tail section looked like Swiss cheese. But flying. Tommy slumped in his position. Couldn't move. Blood loss. Hypothermia from the broken oxygen line. Hypoxia from breathing thin air at 27,000 feet. His last conscious thought before passing out was that Danny would have been proud. 1,400 hours. Kim Bolton. Lucky strike landed hard. Bounced, skidded, stopped. The crew chief was first to the tail section. He'd seen a lot of damage, but this was exceptional. 214 holes in the tail alone. The oxygen line severed. Both guns were still hot from sustained fire. Brass casings covered the deck 6 inches deep, and the tail gunner wasn't moving. Tail gunners hit. Get a medic. They pulled Tommy out on a stretcher. His lips were blue from hypoxia. His left shoulder was soaked in frozen blood. His hands were still locked in position on the gun triggers. They had to pry his fingers loose. The base hospital was overwhelmed with casualties from the Castle mission. 12 bombers from the 379th had been hit. 37 wounded crew members. 4 dead. The doctors were working in triage mode. Serious cases first. Tommy's case was serious, but not critical. The flight surgeon examined the shoulder wound. 2-inch steel fragment embedded in the muscle. Had to come out. No anesthesia available. Metal shortage meant medical supplies were rationed. The doctor gave Tommy a leather strap to bite down on. This is going to hurt. Tommy bit down. The doctor dug into the wound with forceps, found the fragment, extracted it. Blood flowed. The doctor packed the wound with sulfa powder. 14 stitches. Bandage. Oxygen treatment for the hypoxia. Pure oxygen for 30 minutes. Tommy's vision cleared. His thinking sharpened. The gray fog lifted. He was lying on a hospital cot when the intelligence officers arrived. 1,700 hours. Captain Richard Hayes, intelligence officer for the 379th Bomb Group. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, Group Operations Officer. Lieutenant Brennan. Frank Walsh. They stood around Tommy's cot with expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. Captain Hayes spoke first. Voice neutral. Professional. Sergeant Kazan, we need to debrief the Castle mission, specifically your engagement with enemy fighters. Yes, sir. Your pilot reports you engaged enemy aircraft at approximately 900 yards. Is that correct? Yes, sir. You fired continuously for several minutes, expending your entire ammunition load. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And you claim to have destroyed 4 enemy aircraft. Silence. The word claim hung in the air like an accusation. I destroyed 4 enemy aircraft, sir. Not claiming, stating. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped forward. He was a career officer. West Point, 22 years in the Army. He believed in order, discipline, the chain of command. Sergeant, do you understand what you're saying? 4 confirmed kills in a single mission would make you the highest scoring bomber gunner in the 8th Air Force. Fighter pilots occasionally score 4 kills, not gunners. I know what I'm saying, sir. Captain Hayes consulted his notes. Sergeant, according to your ammunition expenditure report, you fired 2,400 rounds. Standard load for tail position is 1,500. Where did you get the extra ammunition? I loaded it myself, sir. Without authorization. Yes, sir. Morrison's face hardened. So you violated regulations on ammunition load. You violated standing orders on engagement range. You violated doctrine on burst discipline. And now you expect us to believe you single-handedly shot down 4 German fighters. I don't expect anything, sir. But I did shoot down 4 Germans. Check the gun camera. Ask the other crews in formation. Ask Lieutenant Brennan. All eyes turned to Brennan. The pilot looked uncomfortable. He was a by-the-book officer. This situation had no book. Sir, I can confirm my tail gunner engaged at extended range. I ordered him to cease fire. He ignored me. But I also saw at least 2 enemy aircraft explode. The navigator confirmed a 3rd. The right waist gunner saw the 4th go down. Frank Walsh stepped forward, still in his blood-stained flight suit. Colonel Morrison, sir, permission to speak freely. Granted, I've flown 12 missions. I've watched 8 bombers from our group go down. I've watched my best friend die 3 weeks ago because we followed the book and the Germans didn't. Today, Kazan didn't follow the book. And we're alive. Every man on Lucky Strike came home. I'll take alive over regulation any day, sir. Morrison's jaw tightened. That's not the point, Sergeant. Discipline is what keeps formations together. Discipline is what wins wars. If every gunner decides to freelance tactics, we have chaos. With respect, Sir Frank said quietly, we already have chaos. We're losing 20% of our crew's per mission. That's not discipline. That's a slaughter. The room went silent. Captain Hayes cleared his throat. Colonel, may I suggest we review the gun camera footage and after-action reports from other crews before we make any decisions? The facts should drive our conclusions. Morrison stared at Tommy for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. Sergeant Kazan, you're grounded pending investigation. Dismissed. They left. Tommy lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. That night, word spread through the base. The tail gunner who shot down 4 Jerrys by breaking every rule. Some called him reckless, some called him crazy, a few called him a genius. The question was whether the Army would court-martial him or medal him. November 2nd, 1943, 8 Bomber Command Headquarters, High Wycombe, 30 miles outside London. The court-martial debate took place in a conference room with maps of Europe covering the walls. Present were the men who decided doctrine and tactics for the entire 8th Air Force bomber campaign. Major Robert Spears represented Training Command. He'd written portions of the current Gantry Manual, Urbain, never flown combat but knew the theory cold. This sets a dangerous precedent, he argued. If we allow enlisted men to ignore standing orders, we lose cohesion. Sergeant Kazan should face Article 92, failure to obey lawful orders. Colonel Maurice Preston commanded the 379th Bomb Group. He'd flown missions over France in 1918. He knew what combat looked like. He shot down 4 enemy aircraft, Preston said simply. He got lucky. If we let every gunner start firing at 900 yards, we'll burn through our ammunition before we even engage the enemy. The mathematics don't support his approach. Captain Hayes laid the gun camera footage on the table. Sir, I've reviewed this frame by frame. It's remarkable. The early aggressive fire disrupted German attack formations. They scattered before reaching optimal firing position. Several fighters broke off completely without engaging. One mission, Spears insisted, one man. Statistical anomaly. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stood. He'd been skeptical during the interrogation, but he'd spent the last 3 days reviewing data. Gentlemen, we need to discuss what we're actually defending here. Is it doctrine or is it lives? He pointed to the casualty charts on the wall. Black Week, 148 bombers lost, 1,500 men. Following doctrine. Our current gunnery tactics result in less than 2% hit rate. Less than 2%. We're asking men to die for a system that doesn't work. The book works, Spears said. The problem is execution. We need better training, better discipline. We have the best trained gunners in the world, Morrison shot back. They're following the book exactly. And they're dying. Maybe the problem isn't execution. Maybe the problem is the book. The debate continued for an hour. Training doctrine versus combat results. Theory versus reality. The men who wrote manuals versus the men who flew missions. Then Major General Frederick Anderson walked into the room. Everyone stood. Anderson was a legend, fighter pilot in World War I, 26 confirmed kills. He'd flown combat when aerial tactics were being invented. When there was no book because nobody had written one yet. Sit, he said. What's the situation? Spears summarized. Staff Sergeant claims 4 kills using tactics that violate all standing doctrine. Training Command recommends court-martial. Anderson looked at the gun camera footage, studied the after-action reports, read the statements from other crews. Then he looked at the loss statistics on the wall, the brutal mathematics of Black Week. Test it, he said finally. Sir Spears looked confused. Test his technique. Send Sergeant Kazan to brief our other gunners. Let him explain his method. Let's see if it works for anyone besides him. General, this undermines years of research and development. Major Spears, and Anderson's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. I flew combat when the research and development was one pilot telling another pilot what worked and what got you killed. Sometimes the best tactics come from the men doing the fighting, not the men writing about fighting. He turned to Colonel Preston. No disciplinary action against Sergeant Kazan. Forward all documentation to my office and authorize him to conduct training sessions with volunteer gunners. I want data, real data, not theory. He looked at Spears. And Major, while we're testing this, you will not interfere or recommend any punishment. Clear, Crystal? Clear, sir. Anderson left. The debate was over. 3 days later, orders came through official channels. Sergeant Kazan was authorized to conduct voluntary training sessions on defensive gunnery tactics. His Distinguished Service Cross was approved. Citation to read extraordinary heroism in aerial combat, continuing to fight despite severe wounds and equipment failure, destroying 4 enemy aircraft. The experiment had begun. November 10, 1943, RAF Kimbolton briefing room. 30 tail gunners assembled at 0800 hours. They sat in folding chairs, smoking cigarettes, arms crossed. Skeptical faces. These were combat veterans, men who'd flown 10, 15, 20 missions, men who'd watched friends die. They didn't need some staff sergeant telling them how to do their jobs. Tommy stood at the front of the room. His left shoulder was still bandaged. He wasn't a natural speaker, wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. But General Anderson's orders were clear. Teach them. One sergeant in the third row spoke up, voice dripping with challenge. I've flown 18 missions by the book, lost 2 crews, saw them burn. Why should I listen to you? Tommy looked at him, didn't flinch, didn't get defensive. I had a friend, Danny Morrison. Good guy, better than me. He followed the book, fired at 600 yards exactly like they taught us. He paused. Danny's dead. The room went quiet. I broke the rules. I'm here. Tommy let that sink in for a moment. You decide which way you want to go. Nobody spoke. The challenge had evaporated. In its place was something else. Recognition. These men had all lost friends, had all watched the book fail. Tommy continued. The book says 600 yards is optimal hit probability, and it's right. Your best chance of hitting a fighter is at 600. He walked to the blackboard, drew a simple diagram. Bomber, fighter, distance markers, but hit probability doesn't matter if you're dead before you fire. German 20mm cannons have 600-yard effective range, which means while you're waiting for permission from the book, they're already shooting at you. He drew firing arcs, red for German cannons, blue for American machine guns. The overlap was obvious. My technique is simple. Open fire at 900 yards, not to kill them, to scare them, make them jink, make them break formation, ruin their attack before they stabilize. Then when they close to 600 yards, if they make it to 600 yards, they're already defensive, already worried, already flying through tracers. That's when you kill them. Silence. Then questions. Real questions from men who wanted to understand. What about ammunition? We'll run dry. You'll run dry if you miss. You won't miss if they're defensive instead of attacking. What if command orders us to conserve ammo? Tell them you're conserving the crew. A few men laughed. Dark humor. Combat humor. How do you lead a target at 900 yards? You don't. At 900, you're not trying to hit. You're creating a wall of fire. Make them fly through it. Make them react. Won't we give away our position? They already know where we are. They're attacking us. The questions continued for an hour. Tommy answered each one honestly. No pretense, no false certainty, just what he'd learned from watching friends die and refusing to let it continue. By the end of the session, 5 gunners volunteered to try the technique. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, 21, Chinese-American from San Francisco, quiet, analytical. Staff Sergeant James Washington, 22, black, Tuskegee trained, one of the few African-American gunners in the 8th Air Force. He'd fought for the right to fly combat. Now he'd fight to survive it. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien, 25, Irish, Boston accent thick as fog, believer in results over regulations. Staff Sergeant Peter Kowalski, 24, Polish. His family had fled Warsaw in 1939. He had personal reasons for killing Germans. Sergeant Billy Henderson, 19, Texas, fresh-faced, eager, wanted to live long enough to see 20. Over the next 2 weeks, Tommy worked with each man individually, taught them not just the technique, but the mindset, aggression at 900, precision at 600, continuous fire until the threat was eliminated. On November 23rd, Chen flew his first mission using the new technique. Shot down one Messerschmitt, damaged another. His bomber came home with minimal damage. November 27th, O'Brien scored his first kill. Washington got 2 in a single mission. The data started coming in. Real numbers from real combat. December brought winter to England. Freezing rain, Mud that never dried, short days and long nights. But the missions continued. Tommy flew one more combat mission, January 15th, 1944. His shoulder had healed enough for flight duty. Target Stuttgart, Germany. The mission went wrong from the beginning. Heavy flak over the target damaged Lucky Strike's #2 engine. Fire in the cowling, Lieutenant Brennan shut it down, activated the fire suppression system. The fire died, but the engine was gone. Then the fighters arrived, 15 Messerschmitts. They'd been waiting. Tommy opened fire at 900 yards. The fighters scattered, came around for another pass. Tommy fired again, continuous bursts, making them defensive. One Bf-109 pressed through the fire, committed to his attack. Tommy tracked him. 700 yards, 650, 600, killed him at 620. Engine fire. The fighter rolled inverted and fell. 5 total kills now, 4 from Castle, 1 today, another Messerschmitt, different angle. 7 o'clock high. Tommy swung the guns, fired, 100-round burst, hits on the wing root, the wing separated, tumbled away. The fighter spun, 6, but Lucky Strike was dying. #3 engine took cannon fire, started running rough, losing power. Oil pressure dropping. Brennan shut it down, 2 engines gone, half the aircraft's power, fuel leaking from a punctured tank, hydraulics failing, altitude dropping. They were at 20,000 feet and descending. Brennan's voice on the intercom, calm, professional. "We're not making England. Prepare to ditch." English Channel, the words every crew dreaded. Ditching meant hitting water at 120 miles per hour. Survival rate was low. Even if you survived the impact, the water temperature was 45 degrees. Hypothermia killed in 15 minutes. Tommy abandoned the tail position, crawled forward through the fuselage. Other crew members were throwing equipment out the waist windows. Guns, ammunition, anything loose, trying to lighten the aircraft. Every pound mattered. Frank Walsh was at the waist gun, methodically stripping it down. His hands were steady, but his face was pale. "We're actually doing this," he said. "We're actually ditching." "We'll make it," Tommy said. Not because he believed it, because Frank needed to hear it. 1,400 hours. Lucky Strike descended through 8,000 feet. The English coast was visible. 20 miles away. Might as well have been 20,000. Brennan brought the bomber down to 200 feet, lined up parallel to the wave direction. Reduced speed as much as he dared. Too slow and they'd stall. Too fast and the impact would kill everyone. Crew positions for ditching. Everyone braced. Brennan's voice. Final instructions. On my mark. Brace. 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 Impact. The B-17 hit the channel at 115 miles per hour. The noise was indescribable. Metal screaming, water exploding. The aircraft's spine broke behind the wings. The tail section sheared off completely. Freezing water flooded in. Tommy was thrown against a bulkhead. His shoulder, the wounded one, took the impact. Pain like fire. He went under. Salt water filled his mouth. Couldn't tell which way was up. Then hands grabbed him, pulled him toward light. Frank Walsh, bleeding from a gash on his forehead but functional. He dragged Tommy to the surface, to the life raft that had auto-deployed. 10 men in the water, 45-degree temperature. The cold was worse than the impact. It drove into your bones, made your muscles seize, stole your ability to think. Tommy pulled Frank into the raft, counted heads. Lieutenant Brennan, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, ball turret gunner, top turret gunner, both waist gunners, tail gunner, all present, all alive. Lucky Strike sank in 90 feet of water, nose first, then gone. The aircraft that had carried them through 15 missions. The aircraft where Danny Morrison had died. Gone. But the crew was alive. 23 minutes later, a British Air Sea Rescue launch arrived. Fast motorboat. Royal Navy crew. They pulled the Americans aboard, wrapped them in blankets, gave them hot tea laced with rum. All 10 men recovered. Hypothermia, exhaustion, minor injuries, but alive. They spent 2 days in a British hospital, then back to Kim Bolton, back to the war. November 1943 through January 1944. The data from Tommy's technique accumulated. Chen 2 confirmed kills, 1 probable. More importantly, his bomber suffered significantly less damage from fighter attacks. Washington 3 confirmed kills. His crew reported that German fighters seemed more hesitant to press attacks when met with early aggressive fire. O'Brien 1 kill, 2 damaged. His ammunition expenditure was higher than regulation, but his bomber's survival rate improved. Kowalski no kills, but his crew noticed the difference. Fighters breaking off earlier. Attacks less coordinated. Henderson 1 kill. The young Texan had survived 8 more missions. Would make it to 20 after all. Captain Hayes compiled the statistics, presented them to 8 Bomber Command. The numbers were stark. Bombers, with gunners using standard doctrine, 7.1% loss rate to fighter attacks. Bombers, with gunners using the Kazan technique, 3.2% loss rate. Difference, 3.9 percentage points. Over 6 months of operations, that difference represented approximately 75 bombers, 750 men who would come home instead of dying over Germany. The intelligence reports from interrogated German pilots confirmed it. Luftwaffe pilot JG-26 captured December 14th an American defensive fire more aggressive than earlier in war. Gunners engage at longer range, more difficult to stabilize for attack run. Another report dated January 22nd, American tail gunners fire continuously now, not in short bursts. Creates impression of heavier defensive armament. Several of our newer pilots breaking off attacks prematurely. February 15, 1944. Weekday, Bomber Command issued Tactical Bulletin 44-2, Subject Defensive Gunnery Techniques. Effective immediately, gunners are authorized to engage enemy fighters at extended ranges up to 1,000 yards when tactically advantageous. The objective is to disrupt enemy attack formations through aggressive defensive fire even when hit probability is reduced. Rationale. Recent combat experience indicates psychological disruption of enemy attacks yields significant survival benefits independent of kill probability. No mention of Tommy Kazan by name. The Army didn't work that way. But every gunner in the 8th Air Force knew. That was the Kazan technique. The doctrine had changed. A high school dropout from Springfield, Massachusetts, had rewritten the manual. Not with credentials, not with authority, with results. Tommy flew his 15th and final combat mission in late January 1944. His official tally stood at 17 enemy aircraft destroyed, the highest confirmed score of any American bomber gunner in the war. Some historians believe the actual number was higher. 20 perhaps, maybe 23. But the nature of air combat made confirmation difficult. When 3 gunners from different bombers all fired at the same Messerschmitt who got credit, the official records reflected only kills that could be definitively attributed to Tommy alone. Command wanted him as a stateside gunnery instructor. Valuable combat experience. Living proof that the new doctrine worked. Tommy refused. I'm done teaching. I did my part. Honorable discharge, February 1944. The award ceremony was small. RAF Kim Bolton. Cold February morning. General Anderson personally pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Tommy's chest. Second highest decoration for valor. The citation mentioned 4 kills at Castle. Mentioned fighting despite severe wounds. Mentioned changing the course of aerial combat. After the ceremony, Anderson pulled Tommy aside. Private conversation away from the others. You proved the experts wrong, Sergeant. That takes more courage than facing the enemy. I just did what worked, sir. That's what makes you dangerous. You think, Tommy went home. March 1944, Springfield, Massachusetts. Train station. His mother Layla was waiting. She'd aged. The war years had been hard on her. Worrying, waiting for telegrams that might say her son was dead. She held him for a long time. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. His sister Rose was 19 now. Working at Smith & Wesson. Making revolvers for the Army. Good pay. She'd saved enough to think about college again. Maybe after the war. Small welcome. No parade. No recognition beyond family. Tommy preferred it that way. He took a job at the American Bosch textile mill, the same factory that had killed his father. Different machinery now, war production, but the same building, same smell of oil and cotton fiber. He kept his head down, didn't talk about the war. The medals went into a drawer. The memories stayed locked inside. The nightmares came every night. Danny's death, burning bombers, frozen blood, screaming on the intercom. He woke up at 0300 covered in sweat hands, reaching for guns that weren't there. May 1944, he met Sarah Mitchell at the Veterans Administration Hospital. He was there for shoulder pain, shrapnel damage that never quite healed right. She was a nurse. 26, Army Nurse Corps, recently discharged. She'd served in England from 1942 to 1943. Different base, different unit, but she knew what combat looked like, knew what it did to people. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said quietly after his examination. Tommy looked at her, really looked, saw someone who understood. They married in November 1944. Small ceremony, family only, no honor guard, no military fanfare, just two people who'd seen the war trying to build something peaceful. Rebecca was born in 1946. Joseph in 1949, named after Tommy's father. House in the Springfield suburbs. Supervisory position at the factory. Lawn to mow, bills to pay, normal life. Tommy never told his children about the war. When Rebecca was 10, she found the medals in his drawer. "Dad, what are these? Just old things, honey." Sarah intervened. "Your father was very brave." "I was lucky," Tommy said. Only once did he break the silence. Joseph at 12 asked the question children eventually ask. "Dad, did you kill anyone in the war?" Long pause. "Yes." "How many enough?" He never discussed it again. Frank Walsh wrote every Christmas, 1945 through 1989. The letters were a chronicle of a life lived because Tommy Kazan had broken the rules. Christmas 1950. "Got married, Tommy. Her name's Marie. She's wonderful. We're expecting our first in April. I think about Danny every day. Think about how he should be here doing this too. Think about you. You gave me this life." Christmas 1965. "My son wants to be a pilot." Showed him my old photos. Told him about the tail gunner who saved his old man by thinking different. He asked if you were a hero. I said yes. Christmas 1980. Lost Marie to cancer last spring. God, Tommy, I miss her, but I had 30 years with her, raised two boys, saw them grow into good men, saw grandchildren. Had a life. 30 years I wouldn't have had if you'd followed the book. Thank you for my life, brother. April 1989, the final letter. Frank's handwriting shaky. Dying. Lung cancer. Doctors give me months. I'm not afraid. I've had 45 years you gave me. Raised two kids, saw grandchildren. Lived Tommy, because you broke the rules. I hope someone tells your story someday. Not because you deserve glory. I know you don't want it, but because people should know. Sometimes the experts are wrong. Sometimes a kid from the streets knows better than the generals. Sometimes courage is saying no, there's a better way. Thank you for my life. Frank. Tommy cried reading it. First time he'd cried since the war. Sarah held him while he shook. I couldn't save Danny, but I saved Frank. Saved the others. You saved 750 Thomas. 750 men who came home. February 14th, 1990. Thomas Kazan died of a heart attack. Quick. No warning. He was 70 years old. His last words to Sarah tell Danny, we fixed it. The funeral was February 18th. Small Catholic church in Springfield. Family present. Sarah, Rebecca and her husband, Joseph and his wife. 4 grandchildren who barely knew their grandfather's story. 6 veterans attended. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan retired. 72 years old. White hair, straight-backed despite age. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, 68. Staff Sergeant James Washington, 68. 3 others Tommy had trained. Frank Walsh was too sick to attend. He died 6 weeks later. The priest gave a standard eulogy. Good man, devoted husband, loving father. The words every priest says when he doesn't really know the deceased. Then Marcus Brennan stood, walked to the front, unexpected. Most of you don't know what Thomas Kazan did. He never told you. That was his way. The church was silent. In 1943, the 8th Air Force was losing 20% of its crews every mission. Men were dying because we followed doctrine written by people who'd never been shot at. The book said, engage at 600 yards, use controlled bursts, conserve ammunition. The book was killing us. Tommy Kazan was a high school dropout. He had no credentials, no authority, no degree in aeronautical engineering or ballistics. But he had something more important. He had eyes, and he had courage. He looked at the problem the experts missed. German fighters had 600-yard cannon range. Our doctrine said wait until 600 yards to engage, which meant they were already shooting at us while we waited for permission from the book. Tommy figured out a better way. Open fire at 900 yards, not to hit them, to scare them, disrupt their attacks before they could stabilize, make them defensive. The experts said he was wrong, said he was wasting ammunition, said he was violating every principle of aerial gunnery. Tommy shot down 17 German fighters, highest score of any American bomber gunner, ever. More importantly, when other gunners adopted his technique, bomber loss rates dropped from 7% to 3%. That difference over 6 months represented 75 bombers, 750 men who came home. Brennan's voice cracked slightly. I was one of them. Frank Walsh was one. These men here were some. Were alive because Tommy had the courage to do what he knew was right, even when everyone told him he was wrong. He never asked for recognition, never wanted glory. He just wanted to keep his friends alive. He succeeded. If there's a heaven for warriors, Danny Morrison is there, waiting to say you did good, Tommy. You did real good. Brennan saluted the casket. The other veterans stood. Saluted. Sarah was crying. The grandchildren finally understood. This quiet man who'd worked in a factory and never talked about the war. This was who he'd been. The legacy Tommy never knew about continued long after his death. 1950s. NATO standardized defensive gunnery doctrine. Early aggressive engagement became standard procedure. No mention of Tommy Kazan, just listed as Tactical Development 8 Bomber Command, 1943. 1960s. Helicopter door gunners trained to engage early, disrupt the enemy. Suppressive fire doctrine descended directly from Tommy's principle. 1970s and 1980s. Modern air defense systems built around the same core concept. Engage threats at maximum range. Force them to react. Create a defensive bubble. Aegis combat systems. Patriot missile batteries. All embodying the principle a high school dropout figured out in 1943. Don't wait for optimal range. Force them to react to you. The statistical truth remained. Tommy Kazan's innovation, refined and adopted across the 8th Air Force, contributed to reducing bomber loss rates by approximately 4 percentage points over 6 months of operations. 75 bombers, 750 lives. Fathers, brothers, sons, who came home. But almost nobody knows his name. Representative Richard Neal of Massachusetts entered a tribute in the Congressional Record in 1995. Thomas Kazan, one of the forgotten heroes of World War II, proposed Medal of Honor nomination. Military bureaucracy buried it in committee. Denied. Air Force Historical Research Agency declassified records in 2005. Published a detailed analysis of tactical innovations in the European theater. One paragraph mentions Staff Sergeant T. Kazan, 379th Bomb Group. Academic interest. No popular attention. A military historian researching bomber loss rates in 2024 found the statistical anomaly. The 379th Bomb Group's numbers didn't match other units. Lower losses, higher survival rates. Started digging, found Tommy's story, published a paper, brief attention, then forgotten again. The final numbers remain. 17 confirmed kills, American record, never broken. 75 bombers saved, 750 lives. Doctrine change that influenced 70 years of air combat. Thomas Kazan, the boy from Springfield who trusted his eyes over the textbook, changed warfare forever, and almost nobody knows. Here is what Thomas Kazan's story teaches. Sometimes the people closest to the problem see what the experts miss. The gunnery instructors had credentials, advanced training, detailed manuals. They'd never been shot at. Tommy had 3 years of high school and a dead best friend. He watched his friends burn while the generals analyzed statistics from headquarters. Different perspectives, different conclusions. He knew what worked. Real courage is not just facing the enemy. Tommy faced Messerschmitts at 27,000 feet, but his real courage was facing his own command, breaking the rules when the rules were wrong, risking court-martial to save lives. The system wanted to punish him. It took General Anderson, a warrior who'd flown combat himself, to recognize warrior wisdom. True heroes don't seek glory. Tommy could have lectured, written memoirs, sought fame. Instead, he went back to Springfield, worked in a factory, raised his kids, kept the medals in a drawer. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it to keep his friends alive. Danny Morrison died because the book was wrong. Tommy Kazan fixed the book. Frank Walsh lived 45 more years because of it, and 749 other men came home to their families. That is the story of Thomas Kazan, the nobody who changed everything. The forgotten hero who saved 750 lives by having the courage to think for himself. These stories matter, not because they're dramatic, not because they're inspiring, because they're true. Real people, real courage, real sacrifice, and they're being forgotten. Thomas Kazan died in 1990. His grandchildren barely knew his story. The men he saved are gone now too. Soon no one will remember. Unless we keep these stories alive. If this story moved you, share it. Tell someone. Write it down. Not to help an algorithm. To honor the men who bled for principles we take for granted. The right to think for ourselves. The courage to question authority. The wisdom to trust our eyes over the textbook. Tommy Kazan never asked for recognition, but the 750 men who came home because of him deserve to be remembered. Their families deserve to know why Dad came home from the war. History deserves the truth. Keep these stories alive, not for Tommy's sake, for ours.